looking at the Bama win against Cincinnati, I'll give some credit to Cincinnati right out of the gate. They certainly never challenged seriously in the game, but they kept it close. It was 10-3 for a long time. They were in the game. They cut it to, what was it, 17-6. There was, they held up physically, athletically. They didn't look embarrassed, outmatched on the field, but clearly Bama was the superior team. In terms of Bama's approach, Stephen, it reminded me of their approach against Notre Dame last year, where they didn't seem to cut it loose, and it felt as though they just thought, okay, we're in control of this game. We're going to run the ball. And obviously they set the tone right out of the gate on that first drive with 12 or 13 consecutive runs before the touchdown pass. Do you think that was by design in setting up for this game against Georgia, or that was just how they needed to play Cincinnati?
I think it was a bit by design, Mark, but I think also Alabama wanted to prove it could run the football. And this is an offensive line that's been sort of up and down all year. So this was the first time Nick Saban kind of looks at Doug Marrone and looks at his offensive lineman and also looked at Brian Robinson, who's been here for 5 years at running back, and Saban sort of thought to himself, this is a game where we should be able to run this football, especially when you discuss Tulsa, who rushed for near 300 yards against Cincinnati. The Bearcats coming into the matchup. Best pass defense in college football, absolutely, but against the run, Cincinnati was giving up roughly 140 yards per game, gave up 14 rushing touchdowns. So Alabama just felt like we don't necessarily need to be all the way explosive in this game if we're able to run this football, because Cincinnati's defensive line was giving up some pounds to Alabama's offensive line. And I felt like, to me, this matchup reminded me of the 2016 Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl between Alabama and Washington. Remember, that defense gave Jake Browning fits out there. Even offensively, Jalen Hurts, not the most polished passer in the world, but they put the game on the back of the offensive line, and Bo Scarborough just ran wild there in Atlanta, 180 yards rushing off 19 carries, had 2 rushing touchdowns in the game. The final score of that one was 24-6. So I kind of felt like it played along the same notion of that 2016 Peach Bowl of the college football playoff semifinal matchup right there, where Alabama, it could have been explosive if it wanted to be. You still saw Bryce Young throw 3 touchdown passes to Ja'Cory Brooks, Slade Bolden, and Cameron Latu. But I still felt like Saban wanted to put the game on the back of the offensive line and Brian Robinson to run the football.
And in doing so, Stephen, though, the offensive line got nicked up a bit. What's your assessment of it? Of course, it's difficult to get exact injury news, but what is the status of the offensive line at this point?
Well, the 2 guys that got banged up, Mark, both came on the right side. Emil Ekiyor at right guard and Chris Owens at right tackle. Owens has practiced since the injury. He's back out there practicing at number 79. Ekiyor is back out there as well. According to Coach Saban, he mentioned that he was very hopeful that Jeff Allen and the training staff would have both of those 2 guys, Ekiyor and Owens, prepared to go to face Georgia. Now, we did see true freshman J.C. Latham at right guard against Cincinnati, taking over for Ekiyor. We also saw Amari Kite filling in at right tackle for Chris Owens. So Alabama does have the backups prepared also, but Saban was extremely hopeful that he would get Ekiyor and Owens back for Georgia, and it looks like both of them will be back.
Brian Robinson obviously had a banner day. When you look at the various lists and charts of performances in postseason play, it ranks just below Zeke Elliott and some of the historic Derrick Henry years and so forth. Not just talking about Bama lore, but in college football, as he drove it for more than 200 yards against Cincinnati. This Georgia front's a different deal. How much do you think Alabama is going to balance what they would like to continue in establishing the run to keep Georgia honest versus relying on the run to try to win this game?
I think you're not going to be able to rely on the run simply because Georgia's a different front. Jordan Davis is 6'6", 340 pounds for a reason. Quay Walker, Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith, those guys are who they are for a reason. So you're not going to be able to just overly rely on the run. However, you do want to implement that to give Georgia something to respect. So I'm not saying Brian Robinson's going to have another 200-yard day, but somewhere between 80 to 125 yards. That's doable. Somewhere between that 80 to 125 yard mark. And then not just Brian Robinson, but mixing in Trey Sanders, mixing in some designed runs with Bryce Young, having that element that Georgia has to respect out there in terms of their defensive front and the secondary. Also, Alabama's going to have to take shots down the field. We know this, with Jamison Williams, with Ja'Cory Brooks, with other guys, Slade Bolden, and that possession, a type of receiver ordeal. Is this a game where we can finally see Jamil Billingsley have that breakout type of game? He's had some off-field issues early on in the season, but has cleaned those up as the season has progressed on. But is this a matchup where Bill O'Brien goes back to reestablishing him at that tight end position? We've seen him establish Cameron Latu. Going back to Cincinnati, Latu had a touchdown reception in that game. So I want to see some screens. Do we get some screen action here with the receivers, with the running backs, with the tight end? So there's different ways that Coach O'Brien can go with this from an offensive standpoint, but it's going to have to be attacking Georgia from different angles. The Bulldogs are who they are for a reason. We saw against Michigan them getting back to that soul-snatching type of performance defensively. So for Alabama, you're going to want to have balance, but it's going to come down to Brian Robinson, maybe in that 80 to 125 rushing yards range, and then getting other guys involved.